Well, nothing like coming on stage after she's been up there. However, kia ora koutou. Croeso, as they would say where I come from in Wales. I'm going to be very open and honest with you. The speech I've written is in a bag down there. Let's start with first things first. In the last few weeks, I've been able to actually take a little bit of time and think to myself, what is the state of Sian's mental health? I've been quite sad. I watch too much news. Big pictures matter to me. And I was finding that I was absorbing. And 99% of that I couldn't solve. And my shoulders were getting heavier, and my self-negative talk was starting to get more prolific. Today, I feel like I've been in 6 months of therapy. It's a cloak of honesty, real, and empathy, the central core value that I get up every day to fight to be the best version of Sian. I think all of the speakers today, it has been said, that there is a core theme between all of us. And I want to use Sian's language. So let me again be very clear before I start. I loved it earlier on when we had one of the speakers who literally said, these are my words, not the organization I work for. What I'd like to start to say is, everything I'm about to say is the world according to Sian. Because that's the only world I really know. Yeah? Doesn't make me right, doesn't make me wrong, just makes me me. So let's start with a fact. It doesn't matter how clever you are, how many qualifications you've got, how much privilege you've got, what size the bank balance of your parents were, or anything else, frankly. It is fundamentally to do with who you choose to be. And who you choose to be are what your core values are. If you don't know what your core values are, 30 years of doing what I do with people all over the world, that is the central, fundamental pillar to having a successful life, being in control of your life, finding balance, which, okay, I don't do all the time. But it is your values that will determine every single decision you make, every word that comes out of your mouth, every way you emotionally respond to anything. Please, if you do not have a working knowledge of what your own core values are, if you do nothing else, Google it. There are a plethora of books. There's loads of ways of doing it. But that is what makes us safe, by knowing what our values are, because it's what drives us. It's what makes us crazy mad. It's what makes us go that extra mile. It's what makes us run away and crawl in a corner and cry. Yeah? Our core values are everything that we are. Let me just add to that our core values, as we become mature enough to have our own independent thought, those values have been brought together by the people that brought us into the world, the community that was around us, the language that was spoken, the weather that was around us, everything. They all go into this massive bucket called beliefs. And what I do in my working world, I'm going to try and work away from this without going too quiet. What I do in my working world is take somebody's bucket. Usually I try and gently tip out. Sometimes I just go, let's just get it all done. And we need to reevaluate those beliefs. Because you will have beliefs, every one of you in here will have beliefs that you picked up when you were that high. And you've never taken the time or never been taught or given the opportunity to reevaluate those beliefs. What you saw today on this stage was virtually every single person that spoke at some point, because I'm sitting there listening to the values bit of it. Every one of them made a choice. I choose to be this. And that is the secret to leadership. I'll go and sit down now. Literally, that's it. An example. At the age of 6, I'm in a junior school. And I have a teacher, Mrs. Greenbury. And every week we did spelling tests. And then on a Friday afternoon, we would come in after lunch, and she would have a large jar of jelly beans on her desk and a whole stack of spelling books. And she would start with what I would affectionately call the geniuses. So we had the first tranche of kids who all got 10 out of 10. And they came up and they were given 10 jelly beans. And it descended down. Throughout the whole year, I never got a jelly bean. If you got less than 3 right, you never got a jelly bean. On this one particular afternoon, I was sitting there with that normal dread of being publicly shamed. And she came to the last book, Quelle Surprise, it was mine, and she told me to stand up. And she said to me, "You are one of the most stupid children I have ever had the misfortune of educating. You do not belong in my class, and I am wasting my breath and energy trying to educate you. Go and stand in the corner by the dustbin where you belong." As I stood there by the dustbin with my head held low, I became aware of a pool of water. I'd lost control of my bladder through blind fear. I stood there all afternoon. She carried on teaching. No acknowledgement, no child in that room lifted their eyes to look at me, to give me a sense of "you're okay." They were all too terrified. I had already been branded, as somebody talked about earlier, yeah? And she was not to be spoken to, or you might catch it. The end of the afternoon, the bell went. I am still standing in the corner. You were asked to put your chairs on the desk, and we left. I ran all the way home. I took my underwear and my socks off. I took a spoon out of the kitchen and I dug a hole in the garden and hid the stuff, hid my underwear and my socks. I had no concept that when my mum and dad came home from work, maybe I should tell them. It wasn't even a thought. The next morning, went to school. The way it worked was that you lined up outside, Mrs. Greenbury came in, and then she would open the classroom door, and then you could go in, you stood by your desk, and you put the chair down. We walked in, we stood by our desk, by our chairs, and she turned and said, "Before anybody puts their chairs down and we start lessons today, I want to know who is the disgusting child in this class who urinated on the floor." You didn't actually need to be a genius to work it out, because it was in the corner where the bin was. A few seconds went past, complete silence. She then went on about how humiliated she was that she had to go to the cleaning lady to come into the class to especially clean up. And she went on and on and on and on and on, and then I don't know where the courage came from. But I just said, "It was me," with that voice. I was 6. I didn't even know I had that voice. What happened to me in that 24 hours, I don't know what the proper words are, but the best way I can describe it is it was like I was given a cloak of shame. And I felt like I didn't belong. And I genuinely couldn't understand. Because I did go to school every day trying my best. I did sit there and really listen and try and be like everybody else. Let's fast forward a few years. So I'm now in a different junior school. And in the UK, we don't have middle school. You go from primary straight up to senior school, or what it was in those days, because I'm very old, comprehensive school, where my elder brother and sister already were. So it was a few days before the end of the school year. I was about to leave, go up to comprehensive with my brother and sister, and the school secretary comes to the classroom door. Sian Owen, the headmaster's office. To be fair, I was a very good girl. I was what you would call wallpaper. I learned how to blend into the background. Yes? Don't say anything, Sian, because you're likely to be wrong. Just be very quiet and blend. So I go off to the headmaster's office, and to my surprise, my mother and father are sitting in there. We sit down, he starts talking, and blah, 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 which the bit that I heard was, and Mr. and Mrs. Owen, I'm here to inform you that Sian will not be going to the local comprehensive. We have found her a place in the school for the educationally subnormal. My mother's dead. Clearly none of you met her, but if you did, my mother had a face that you only had to look and you could see everything that she was thinking. And I can remember that face, first of all. And she just looked at him and said, "What exactly do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you know, Sian can't read. She can't write. She's a bit slow. She doesn't engage." My father looked at my mother looked at my father. "Right. Do we have a choice in this?" says my mother. And he said, "No, I'm afraid we don't. The way the school state system works, your daughter has been, we didn't use the assessed, labelled, given that T-shirt, and that's it. She doesn't get to go to any school. That's the only one she can go to." The next summer, the next 6 weeks of my summer holiday, was like being taken in a spaceship to an alternative reality. My mother and father, thankfully, were both psychiatric nurses and had a very good working knowledge of what it meant to be educationally subnormal. Dreadful term, which I'm very pleased to say is never used now, but then that was the term that was used. My mother was determined that I wasn't going to go to that school, that it was completely inappropriate. But there was no state school in the whole of the UK that would take me. So suddenly, 2 psychiatric nurses needed to find the funds, and they had 4 kids, to send this one to private school. What my mother didn't understand, she did quite soon, but was that you have to pass what they call a common entrance exam. Well, that ain't going to happen. So for the whole summer, I was dragged around the UK to fancy-schmancy girls' boarding schools, all over. Sit in the morning, do the common entrance test, then you go and have an interview and told whether or not you've got a place. After 7 schools, it would seem I was virtually uneducationable, whatever that means. So the next step was Howell's School for Young Ladies in North Wales. Last school on the list. Same routine, I go, we drive down this massive gravel, there's turrets, it literally looks like Hogwarts. I go in, I sit there, I do this common entrance exam. I don't know what I put on the paper. I could write my name, and I could write 1 to 10 and stuff like that, but I don't know what I put on it, I can't tell you. So we had break after morning, and we go out onto these massive hockey fields with massive oak trees, exactly like you would imagine, yeah? I'm sitting under this tree. There's all these girls there who are also doing the test. They all seem to know each other. Whatever. So I sit. I'm used to being wallpaper, so I'm sitting on the trunk of the tree on the bottom, on one of the roots. And this woman comes out, plaid skirt, sensible shoes, marching along with 2 Labrador dogs. And she goes past me. One of the Labradors comes up to me, and so I'm loving the dog and kissing him and whatever. And she said, "Do you like dogs?" I said, yeah, I love dogs. "Come with me, young lady. Let's go and have a walk." I didn't know her from the bar of soap, so I go walking with her. We walk round all of the hockey pitches. We come back. Lovely, thank you very much. Go in, lined up in this wooden panelled, extraordinary environment, hundreds and hundreds of years old. And then eventually, my name's called with Mum and Dad. We get up, we walk into the headmistress's office, and lo and behold, who's sitting there but Joan Sadler, the woman I'd just been for a walk with her dogs. There was a long conversation between my parents and her, the highlights being, "Mr. and Mrs. Owen, I am very confident in telling you that I do not think Sian will be going to Oxford or Cambridge. In fact, I think any Red university may be a step too far. However, what I can tell you is that I am going to ask you to please allow us to educate Sian. Because one thing I do know is that she is going to make an extraordinary citizen." I didn't know what citizen meant, but I liked it. You can read the bio, and whoever rewrote that, thank you very much, whoever wordsmithed it. I have done some extraordinary things in my life, and I'm incredibly proud of them. Why? It wasn't because I was educated and had a degree. It wasn't because the door was open for me. It wasn't because I had a blind passion. I became and am who I am because of the values that I was brought up around. Those 2 parents I spoke of earlier left the National Health in the middle 70s. Why? Because they believed that adults with early onset dementia did not belong in the big Bedlam mental hospitals. They borrowed money from family and friends and bought a rumble, tumble-down cottage hospital in the middle of nowhere. I lived there for 7 years of my life as a child. They didn't have money to buy a house, so we lived on site. I literally got up in the morning, went into the dining room, and sat at tables with people rocking plant pots, singing, "Who am I? Where am I? When's the next train to Barmouth?" That was my normality. I would be walked to the bus stop by 2 old gentlemen singing war songs. I would come home from school. I would sit on the floor and paint ladies' fingernails, sing, work. We all did. There was 4 of us. We cleaned rooms. And as we got older, both of my sisters became nurses. Crazy bitches. Why would anybody do that? I never, by the way, ever, unlike Lana and most of the people that we've said, had any aspirations. All I wanted was somebody to employ me. Yeah? Because I didn't actually believe I was employable. It was the core values that I learnt from my childhood, from my parents, to care and protect for the vulnerable. I didn't know any different, yeah? It wasn't like I'm special. I'm not. It's all I knew. I then went to boarding school, Howell School for Young Ladies. And in my end of my 2nd year, by which time most of the teachers, 99.9% of them, had said to me in different forms, be quiet, Sian, sit at the back of the class, Sian, read comics, Sian, do whatever you like, Sian, but don't take him any oxygen because we also believe that you're uneducationable. We can't teach you anything. Yeah, just don't disturb the class. So I was around 13, 14 years of age. And I was dreadfully, dreadfully unhappy. To say I was bullied was an understatement. I was excluded. To one point that I had a diary, which I have to say to you, a few years back I got out to try and read, and even I couldn't read what I was trying to say. But what I very distinctly remember, that there was one time, because we had 3 terms in the UK, not 4 like here, yeah? So there was, at one point, I had not been spoken to, as in to my face. I'd been given instruction in a collective, but I had not been spoken to my face for 3 weeks. The girls were frightened. It's not they didn't like me, but she's very fucking odd. Yeah? And we're tribal human beings. You don't go and stand by the person that's odd. And you don't do it in an all-girls boarding school in the middle of nowhere. So, 8 minutes, talk faster. So, what happened was, I had a head of religious studies, which we called scripture. Miss Marsh, who was from up north. She had been a missionary. And she was a very, very nice lady. And her brother was a dean at Aberystwyth University. And she went to a dinner there that her brother invited her to, because Professor Miles had just come back from America, and it was a big celebrationary dinner for this Professor Miles, whoever he may be. So Miss Marsh goes there, and he is talking about his 2 years sabbatical in America, learning about learning disabilities, specifically dyslexia. And he's sitting there at the top of the table pontificating about this is his research, this is what he's learned, this is what it looks like. And so Miss Marsh at the end of the dinner says, "Can I have a word with you? I've got a girl in my class, just like that. When you talk to her, you can see that the lights are on, but ask her to write anything down and it's gobbledygook." So let's fast forward a couple of months. I knew nothing of this. She came back to school, spoke to Joan Sadler. Joan Sadler spoke to my parents. They had this big conflab. I'm then called out of class again. This time I'm a little bit older, thinking I could well and truly be in the shit. I must have done something wrong. So I go into the room, I sit there, and it's explained to me, and I did have a choice. Did I want to go to Bangor University to be the first person that the education unit that had part of it had bonded with the psychology department to do this research on dyslexia, right? So Professor Miles is the god of dyslexia. So all I heard was, if I'm honest, you go to stay in Aberystwyth University for 3 days, you'll get your own room, and you'll be able to wander around Aberystwyth and do a bit of shopping and things in the afternoon. Result, 3 days out of school. Right? So I go. All I can remember happening is that every day we did different things. I had to pour water from jugs, patterns that I had to move around, pictures with dots in them. I remember that. I remember strobes or whatever you think being put on my head like a swimming hat, yeah, and being wired up to God knows what. 3 days of testing. Lovely, chubbly bubbly, finished it, went back to school, didn't really think anything of it. It was a bit special, a bit out of school for 3 days, end of, that was it. Next thing, I'm called back into the headmistress's office. This time I go in there, and there are about 20 people in there. The senior management team, Professor Miles, some of the faces I remember who had been at the university. And they started talking about me in language and in a way that was so alien I couldn't identify with any of it, yeah? Going through all the tests, saying what this meant, what that meant, whatever. Came towards the end, and all I remember Professor Miles saying, and then we did the Stanford intelligence test. Now, I don't know, your educators here will know that, but The Stanford Intelligence Test is the basic test that anywhere in the world is you test the intelligence from children from a baseline. Yeah, there are many others now. 30, 40 odd years ago, this was being done, right? And in the Stanford Intelligence Test, Sian is of superior intellect. Yes! That's all I heard. That's all I heard. Yeah? And if I'm absolutely honest, after what had happened in junior school and what was now happening then, I had created a belief. Remember me telling you about beliefs that we all have and we carry around in our buckets? I had created a belief that I actually had a psychiatric illness and that my parents loved me so much that they didn't want to tell me. I had no aspiration to be anything. All I wanted was to be chosen. All I wanted was to be acknowledged, recognized. Somebody to tell me I had a talent. Then walks into my life Wendy Gray-Lloyd, head of drama. And Wendy, who is now 87, is my surrogate mother. I will fly to the UK next month, and I will create a reunion just to celebrate the fact that she's on Earth. She took me into a classroom the very first day at time, and she said, Sian, we're not going to read anything. Words of the printed nature are not coming into our classes at all. There is a stool. I want you to be a witch. And I improvised. And somehow, she drew out of me the fact that apparently I'm a performer. I won exams, the only time I ever passed exams in my entire life. I went to festivals and came home with cups. I ended up going to drama school. Not because I had any burning desire to be an actor, because it was the only thing I could do. So I went for 3 years, and I did work professionally for 3, nearly 4 years afterwards. And actually, I was quite good. I got jobs. But the truth of the matter was, I didn't fit into that tribe. I wasn't quite as ego-driven as my peers. I found it a little bit difficult to stand in that spotlight and sing me, 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 me all the time. And equally at the same time, I was working for social services on what in those days was called the Reserve Bank. So they would ring me up and say, we need a member of staff here, there, anywhere, adults with learning disabilities, school for autistic children, that's what they were called in those days, yeah, the deaf school, yeah, dementia units, all of those things. And I would go and supplement and pay my rent when I wasn't working as an actor in doing all of those things. Now, to me, that was like, yeah, I'd been brought up from that age. People dribbling and not making sense and being challenging was what I'd been around all my life. I became the woman I am when I was given the opportunity to work in social services, and there's 1.5 minutes left. My values made me who I was. I ended up being head of the inspection service for the biggest borough in London, having the responsibility of the care and protection of thousands and thousands of people. I was not a qualified social worker. I did not have a degree. But 2 women who could see who and what I was leant in and said, we've got your back, go and do that job. And I whistle blew on 2 frauds. One was a £28 million fraud that was taking money from adults from learning disabilities. I whistle blew on that. I had a private detective following me. I had my office broken into, my car broken into, and I was at the front page of the newspaper saying I was having an affair with the director of social services. Now, as it happens, my husband, who's over there, laughed. His wife didn't. I also was asked, I was shoulder tapped and asked to go and work in Secure Unit, which is a children's prison. I don't like using that term, but I'm trying to very quickly let you understand what environment it was, right? And this was 30 odd years ago. I went there, I was shoulder tapped to go and do it. I wasn't qualified, I wasn't really experienced in that world at all. But within 2 weeks, I realized that this was a zoo and this was not somewhere I could stay and work. So I marched up to the Director of Social Services office, who didn't know me from a bar of soap, sat outside until she ordained to see me, and I told her that that place was dangerous and was a zoo. Fast forward, I ended up 3 days later sitting in the office of the Minister in Parliament, the head of criminal justice, with lawyers and God knows what, telling them what I'd seen. And for the next 12 months, I was given the role of closing down that unit, redeploying 380 staff, 5 of which ended up going to prison, and I am so proud of that. My values, I will shut up. Please learn what your values are. Please. It will drive you, it will hold you safe, it will be what you wrap yourself up in when you go to bed and you think, yeah. One other thing before I finish. Conventional wisdom will tell you that there is only one set of values, yes? I'm now at an age and stage in my life where I actually believe that's not true. I have a set of core values which is Sian in her personal world. But I have a different set of core values that are in my workplace. Because if I took the workplace values into my home, I would be divorced by Friday. The hybrid version of leadership for any woman is to know what your professional core values are. People need to know who you are when you walk in a room. Everybody knew, do not mess with her. She will rip your face off if you in any way compromise the protection of vulnerable people. And I will, and I still do. Equally, I hope, I know, because I do ask, I work with empathy and a non-judgmental view, yes? Because I know what it's like to be judged. I know what it's like to be put on the scrap heap and told you're going to be nothing. And there. So, the speech there, I hope you've enjoyed this one. Please, please, please. And in answer to the networking question, Google me, find me. Yes, there's a lot of you. But if you need somebody to talk to, if you need some help, and this isn't about drumming up work, right? Because one of my core beliefs is, when I learned to give unconditionally for the right reasons, my world became a whole lot better. And if I can help you, and if I can be there for you, I will. And there is nothing I like better than advocating for a woman. Thank you.
Wow, Sian, that really touched my heart. There were a few tears that came through there. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm very pleased you chose to be you, I think is the line that you said. You chose to be you, chose to own your values, and now we get to benefit from your story. And thank you so much for sharing that and inspiring the women in this room.